I think a policy is a tool in the tool belt that should be used appropriately. That's easy to say. You should use it appropriately. Don't use it inappropriately, obviously. It's just been the go-to tool. It's been the tool that companies go to. And I think it's the wrong tool to go to first when you're dealing with the ethical nightmares of AI.
If you're in compliance, this will feel familiar. The risk changes faster than the policies. By the time you've come up with a plan to address AI, the goalposts have moved, and your team is left scrambling to catch up. That's why today I'm joined by Reid Blackman, the author of the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. And he's calling for a way of approaching AI governance that doesn't use the tools of the past to try to catch up with the tools of the future. Today's episode is about a practical way to govern AI at scale, so you can stay ahead of the curve, but not sacrifice on operational efficiency. Because when AI starts becoming part of key decisions, poor governance can lead to real consequences. This is BCG on Compliance, a podcast that explores today's most pressing financial crime trends and how compliance professionals are adapting to stay ahead of that curve. I'm Hanjo Seibert. Hi, Reid. Welcome to the show. Welcome to BCG on Compliance.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Today, I'm really excited because this is a unique episode. I think we never had a philosopher on the show, and it's a fascinating perspective to explore. How did that expertise lead you to your work focusing on AI and consulting, Reid?
Sort of cards on the table. The philosophy stuff has helped me a tremendous amount, but there's also a sort of steep learning curve figuring out how do we translate the philosophical perspective into actual on-the-ground directives, instructions, guidance, et cetera. So that's that. Okay, so how did I get started? I was a philosophy professor. I specialized in ethics. I became aware of the ethical risks of AI. Blah, blah, blah. I figured out, okay, I think if companies are going to use AI, things can go ethically sideways in a variety of ways. If it goes ethically sideways, especially in the age of social media, that means it's going to go reputationally sideways. In some cases, it's also going to go legally sideways. And so I started to think, okay, so ethical risk here is really reputational and legal risk as well in businesses. And so I think there's something there. One thing that was particularly helpful is being able to spot the stuff that's really not helpful. Because especially when this field was emerging and people started talking about AI ethics, there was lots of misguided by non-philosophers, misguided assumptions about what ethics is about or how to do ethics or what's helpful or how to go about incorporating ethics into AI. And so being able to say, no, not that is really powerful when lots of suggestions are being made about how to proceed incorporating ethical considerations into how we develop and deploy AI.
And when you say there's a lot of misconceptions, could you maybe give our listeners a bit of your definition of what is ethical, if there is ever such a definition, or how would you describe ethical in that sense when you say there's a lot of misperception?
First thing I would do is I would say no. I won't describe ethical for you. Any definition of ethics I give you is bound to be problematic. Philosophers themselves, ethicists themselves will argue about a proper quote unquote definition of ethics. But I don't think we need it in order to make progress. So if I say something like, we should execute people who commit murder, we should put people in prison if they eat too much cheese, or, we should go to the Italian restaurant tonight instead of the Mexican restaurant tonight. You shouldn't lie to your best friend unless there's extreme, extenuating circumstances. I think we're already basically good at recognizing when are we in the realm of ethics and when are we not. And then the difficulty comes in, how do we answer certain kinds of ethical questions? So is it ethically permissible to execute people who have murdered other people? Is it ethically permissible to lie to your friend if it'll save them from having hurt feelings about something? And now we start getting into, if you like, ethical inquiry, which fundamentally is not different than other kinds of inquiry, where we're trying to, we argue with each other, we bring evidence and reasons to the table, and we try to see what does the evidence support, what are the reasons support, and maybe we come to an agreement, maybe we don't, but at least we're engaged in a certain kind of inquiry, and we do the same kinds of thing in ethics.
What Reid is discussing is important to understand in terms of being at the most cutting edge of technology. But what he is talking about is the bread and butter of compliance professionals. What can go wrong? What can we do to stop things from going wrong? And how can we prove it?
The general goal there, of course, is to avoid the various ethical, reputational, regulatory, and legal risks of AI, obviously. Okay, then the question is, how do you do that? Here's the old school way, which is still the prevalent way. I articulated this view in my first book, Ethical Machines. I practiced this view. I practiced this approach for 5 or so years. And it's the approach of the big 4 accounting firms, the major consultancies, the minor consultancies. And it's a very top-down, policy-first approach. So at 30,000 feet, it looks like this. You articulate your values or your pillars or whatever, justice, fairness, privacy, et cetera. Then you create certain kinds of procedures where compliance with those procedures means that you're living up to those values. You encapsulate those, or you enshrine those rather, in policy, and then you try to implement that policy. And this process is extremely slow. It's bottlenecked by the C-suite and the board, because they've got to make these big decisions about what should the enterprise-wide policy look like. It reduces living up to values to compliance with procedures, independently of what the effects of that happen to be. And it's basically impossible to scale, because scaling a policy like this takes a long time to implement. And it's not adaptable, because you take over a year to pass a policy for traditional machine learning, and then generative AI is on the loose, and you have to come back and you have to update your policy. And then Agentic AI comes online. And so you're in this constant scramble of implementing a defunct policy while trying to update the policy. So it's a mess.
Reid paints a picture of a slow-to-respond workplace, caught trying to establish robust routines while the landscape around AI is shifting underneath their feet. And while a strong policy is a must, he sees it as a blunt tool in the quest to create ethical compliance practices.
The core of the ethical nightmare challenge is 3 questions. What are the ethical nightmares of your organization as they pertain to AI? What resources will you use or build to avoid those nightmares? And how will you train people to use those resources effectively? So identify the nightmares, resources to avoid them, training needed to use those resources effectively. That's the ethical nightmare challenge. One important thing to note here is that these 3 questions are askable, if you like, at every level of the organization. You can ask it at the project level. What are the resources we're going to build to avoid those nightmares, and how will we train people to avoid those nightmares? You can ask it at the department level. Hey, we're the marketing department. What are the ethical nightmares of AI that pertain to the marketing department? What resources does the marketing department have? And finally, of course, you could ask it at the enterprise level, the C-suite board level. What are the ethical nightmares of the organization as a whole? What resources, what training, et cetera. This is really important, I think, because we need clear communication about AI risks and how to avoid them. And one reason we need that clear communication is that AI is so cross-functional and so far-reaching that we need to engage in cross-functional, cross-departmental collaboration.
When a policy has to scale across so many different teams, often with competing goals, it can lead to communication breakdowns, all the while leaving enterprises exposed to reputational damages.
We have what we call ENC teams, Ethical Nightmare Challenge teams. They are engaged in problem solving. What are the nightmares? And can we figure out what resources and training can we develop to avoid those nightmares? So we're focused here around adaptable problem solving, as opposed to compliance with procedures contained in a policy that is now out of date.
Before we get too far into governance, a quick definitional moment. Generative AI generates pictures, text, summaries. Agentic AI, which Reid mentions here, refers to AI that can plan, create tools, and take steps toward a goal. Think of opening up ChatGPT and asking it for a summary. Agentic AI is more like an AI employee, someone who can interact with a customer and have access to potentially sensitive business knowledge. Any errors can create a cascading effect, touching multiple systems in a business.
There's one client that I like to talk about in particular, Fortune 500 company, consumer packaged goods. You're not even talking about healthcare, financial services, where the risk is much higher. We're talking about CPG. So the people that we worked with over there, really smart, really quick to understand what was at issue, understand the pros and cons that we presented, quick to make a decision. We created a draft policy in maybe a month or so. By the time the board of directors approved that policy, it was over a year. And that's just the speed of enterprise when we're talking about things like policies. nothing had even been implemented yet. Now we have to start implementing, and then we started implementing, and that takes at least 6 months per department within a particular region. So it's lessons that we learned the hard way, that people are trying to pass policies that take too long. AI is moving on. Then you're trying to implement a policy that hasn't moved on as AI has moved on. So you're implementing this defunct policy, but you got to get the cooks back in the kitchen to update the policy. It's a mess. So that's one of the explanations for how we got to the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. Just knowledge of this does not work well. It works well for traditional machine learning, which is what we built it for. And then we tried updating it. And when I say we, I mean not just my company, but if you like, everyone in this space tried updating that method for generative AI. And now with agentic AI, people are trying to update it again. And I'm saying, forget it. That's like saying, hey, we started out with this manual about how to take care of cats. Hey, can you update that manual so that it includes tigers? No, we can't. It's a different beast. It's the same species. Traditional machine learning and agentic AI are the same species. It's both kinds of AI, as I like to say. They're both kinds of software that learns by example, but they're different beasts. You can't just update your cat thing. You can't update your traditional machine learning playbook to account for agentic. So part of it is just lessons learned the hard way. The other is just taking a step back and looking at the evolution of AI and how it's changed over the past, just call it 5 years or so, from traditional or narrow AI to generative AI, then to agentic AI. And you can see that the complexity is just mounting.
I wanted to double down on what you think should change with regards to the way AI governance is approached these days. What do you think needs to change in AI governance?
I'm not as such anti-policy. Policies are really good when you want to ban stuff. Do not ever do this. Fine, okay, have a policy. I think a policy is a tool in the tool belt that should be used appropriately. That's easy to say. You should use it appropriately. Don't use it inappropriately, obviously. It's just been the go-to tool. It's been the tool that companies go to, and I think it's the wrong tool to go to first when you're dealing with the ethical nightmares of AI. Okay, so have a policy, but that shouldn't be your opening move. The other thing to say is there's various ways of integrating the ethical nightmare challenge method with how governance is already done and audit is already done, internal compliance is already done. So for instance, you can check to see whether the 7 steps have been carried out, right? So there's documentation of this. Hey, ENC teams, are you just sort of like scribbling out this worksheet after the fact? Or did you follow the 7 steps in the right order? Did you, comply with the things you're supposed to do? So did you create the team? Is it cross-functional? Did you check the boxes of that? Did you list the nightmares? So you can just do certain simple yes/no questions, just binary standard audit kinds of things. Like, did you do this thing? Yes or no, right? And because the work that the ENC team does is all documented in a worksheet that they're working through, it's relatively straightforward to say, yeah, they did it, no, they didn't do it. You can also have enterprise-wide policy or department-level policy that the ENC team is expected to incorporate. So among the ethical nightmares, or among the nightmares that we might run into with this particular AI, is that we might run afoul of this particular enterprise policy. So included in the scope of nightmares that are being considered are potential of running afoul of certain policies of the organization. So it's not as though it's all the other things fall away completely. It's just that they become part of a larger picture of how do we think about the risks here.
Reid still believes that compliance professionals will have an important role to play in this new alignment.
I don't want people to mishear me and think, oh, compliance people are just making sure that other people have done the work, the ENC work. I also think that compliance people should serve on ENC teams. They have a certain kind of expertise, they have a certain kind of insight, they have a certain kind of experience where they are going to be able to spot potential nightmares in a way that, say, a data scientist can't or somebody in marketing can't. So that ENC team, I've tried to stress its cross-functionality. I include here that you should have a member from the compliance team serve on the ENC team. They should also be the ones to make sure that the ENC team was done correctly, because then you have the fox guarding the hen house, but that needs to be a separate ENC team member. But compliance people should be on ENC teams. I think they're crucial members of the team.
Gen AI changes the control problem, not only because there's a risk in how the model is built, but also because of the risk in how people use it.
It's very easy to get taken in by a generative AI that says, oh, you should do this, or here's the way to go, or that's a great idea, here's why. It's so confident, it seems so reasonable, but it hallucinates, number one. And number two, people are given to what's called automation bias, which is when we just we tend to trust the outputs of computers. So if people aren't trained in the right kind of way, then they're just going to defer to confident AI, even when it's hallucinating, even when it's making things up. And you can have a policy that says you're responsible for, the outputs and vetting them. Fine, that might do well in a lawsuit, maybe, I don't know. But if you don't have the proper training, if you don't train the people how to properly vet for hallucinations, really give them some hands-on experience of things going sideways and them catching it, you're going to get people who are inappropriately using generative AI. One of the things that we need to do in AI is we need to push more responsibility onto the teams that are creating and developing, deploying, monitoring the AI. They need to do more work. One of the things that people do now is they escalate all the high-risk stuff. So they have some way of assessing high risk, and then it gets escalated to a committee, and now this committee has to review it. And that works when you're just talking about a handful of AI solutions. When you're talking about dozens, let alone hundreds, let alone thousands of AI solutions, you can't do that because now that committee becomes a massive bottleneck. I mean, it's just reviewing a case after. So the only way to avoid that bottleneck, well, there's two ways. One is impossible. Just keep creating more committees. That's impossible and dumb. And the other way is to enable that front line of defense to be able to be better defenders. Having those enterprise-wide risk management people, that framework, if you inform how ENC teams at the project level work, I think that's crucial, and they should show up on those teams. And then there's other ways of incorporating it. So I'm not at all advocating that enterprise-wide risk framework needs to go away. It's a matter of how do we integrate these things? How do we integrate the ENC method, which we need in order to take advantage of AI's opportunities, with how we traditionally do risk management?
What are some ethical dilemmas or nightmares that you can see becoming more important and more common in the near future?
I think we're going to see risks relating to cascading failures, systemic failures, and autonomy. So very quickly, you can have an AI that's connected to lots of tools. So you have an agent, and something goes wrong with one of the things to which it's connected, right? The database is corrupted. The database contains some sensitive or private information that it wasn't supposed to contain, but now the LLM is accessing it. Some of the model hallucinates, so it gives hallucinated data to a narrow AI, it puts it into the enterprise software. And so now you just have a domino of failures, what are called cascading failures, or the snowball effect. A tiny error here leads to a tiny error there. And so you can see that both in a single agent, where the tool switch is connected, we have cascading errors, snowball effect, and you can see it across multiple agents, right? So if you've got one agent who makes a tiny error, passes it on to another agent, passes it on to another agent, now you've got the snowball effect. So we're going to see cascading effect errors, cascading effect ethical risks realized because of that. Then you have systemic errors or errors of the system or emergent risks. So the way to think about this is, I want you to imagine a basketball team where all the players are good. There's no bad apples, but they just got different styles. One plays a really fast game and is good at it. One's really good at playing a really slow game. And when they get together, even though they're individually great basketball players, they make for a terrible team. There's something about the way that this team operates that is just not good. So whereas with cascading failures, you had sort of a bad apple leading to domino effect. Here you have no bad apple, but the way all the good apples interact with each other, all the good basketball players interact with each other, you get a bad result. You get a bad team. You can have the same thing with agents. So all those agents, they're sort of, if you like, on the ethical up and up, but they just make for a bad team, and now things are going ethically sideways. So you've got to take a look at those systemic or emergent or team risks, if you like. And I think we're going to see those as agents get connected to other agents. And then finally, we have autonomy. Autonomy isn't, if you like, it's kind of a risk unto itself, but it's really a higher level risk because it's what happens when the AI just goes off and does stuff on its own. And what you could have with autonomy is you could have a cascading or snowball effect error, or you could have an emergent risk or systemic risk or a team risk error, and the agent doesn't notice that risk. And because it's acting autonomously, it's acting insanely fast, right? Because it doesn't have to stop for humans to pause it. It's processing so much data and moving so quickly and making so many decisions that now you have, if you like, an amplifier of a cascading effect, of a systemic risk, of a hallucination, of a privacy risk, of a bias, of a hallucination, et cetera. So those are the risks that are going to ramp up as we see agentic AI develop.
For compliance leaders looking ahead, this is a helpful risk map to focus your attention. Bias, hallucinations, privacy, and IP leakage are all things to bear in mind as we go forward.
Reid, you talk about AI for not bad rather than AI for good. Could you explain the distinction a little bit and what you mean with that?
Yeah, so back in the day, 2018, 2019, 2020, et cetera, lots of people were talking about AI ethics. That sort of transitioned in the corporate world to responsible AI or trustworthy AI or AI governance or AI assurance. But I thought that people were sort of confused when they talk about AI ethics, that it was sort of ambiguous. Because some people were they wanted to pursue these ethical goals using the powerful tool that is AI. Or they want to pursue the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals, the SDGs. These are goals that wear their ethical credentials on their sleeve. So those people were considered to be in the AI ethics space. And then there were people like me who just wanted to avoid the bad stuff of AI, given that you're pursuing whatever, let's say, business objectives that you have, assuming those business objectives are not intrinsically ethically objectionable. So one is about promoting the good, and one is about avoiding the bad. And so I think AI ethics broadly breaks up into AI for good and AI for not bad, where the AI for good people are pursuing these noble ethical goals. That's great. And the AI for not bad people are essentially engaging in what I would now call ethical risk mitigation.
The takeaway here is not to just write another policy. It's to pilot a method you can directly embed and scale into how teams actually build and deploy AI.
Maybe to leave our listeners with one last question and answer, what's your best advice for a Fortune 500 company for the new year? And I'm asking this especially as we're new into the year 2026. So some advice that you could give a large company, doesn't have to be a Fortune 500, but any large company in the world.
Speaking of bias, I'm going to give you a biased response, which is they should pilot the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. One thing that goes on with AI governance generally is that you don't pilot it, you just do it. You take all this time to get all these people together, you create a policy and procedures and metrics, and like either it works or it doesn't. The Ethical Nightmare Challenge is pilotable, where you can just try it with a team, with one team. You can try it with 3 teams. You can try it with at the project level. You can try it at the department level. So it's biased, but it's also, I went through the journey of this is informed by learning lots of lessons the hard way, seeing where AI has come and, where it's evolved and how it's continuing to evolve. And so I think if you want the advice to be more general, try an approach to AI governance that is rapidly implementable, scalable, and pilotable. I don't know one other than the Ethical Nightmare Challenge. If you can find it, pilot that one too.
Are you having conversations about AI governance in your team? Join the conversation by connecting with us on your podcast app, writing a review of the show, or emailing us at bcgoncompliance@bcg.com. I'm Hanjo Seibert. Thanks for listening.